Good evening, everybody. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the Wyoming House District Political Forum, sponsored by the Sweetwater County Library System. I'm Tom Ellis with WYO Radio. Tonight, we will hear from one of the two candidates vying for a spot on the general election ballot. Joining me on the panel is Dave Aaron Bell from Sweetwater Now. The candidates for District 17 are Democratic incumbent JoAnn Dayton and Republican challenger Traci Ciepiela. The candidates will be answering questions from this panel, but audience questions will be considered if time allows. Turn in questions at the back of the room. The forum will start with an opening statement. Traci Ciepiela, we will hear from you first. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for hosting this, especially the library and the different organizations over here. My name is Traci Ciepiela. I am new to politics. This is the first race that I have ever entered into my entire life. So a little bit about me. I graduated with a bachelor's in communication from Buffalo State. I graduated with a master's in criminal justice from Columbia College in Missouri. I spent 7 years working in radio prior to moving to a career in law enforcement. I spent 15 years working law enforcement jobs, specifically mostly patrol. My first job, though, I was a part-time firefighter as well. I found out I was not a very good firefighter, so I went back to just policing. So I spent 15 years in law enforcement while working on a master's degree and additional education. I have moved to Wyoming in 2006. And I started working at Western Wyoming Community College. I have been there now this is my 13th year, and I have loved every minute of it. I've made my Wyoming my home. I have chosen to stay here. Even though I've had opportunities to leave, I have chosen to stay. This is my home. I purchased a house here back in 2006, and I still reside in that same location. Here in Wyoming, while here, I have become a member of Toastmasters. I am a member of the Sweetwater County Board for Parks and Rec. I am currently the treasurer for that board. I created, started, and continue to direct the Race on the Rock Triathlon, which takes place here in Rock Springs every August. We did our 5th year this past year, and we moved it out to the Flaming Gorge. And I will say that other than approximately 10 participants, everybody else came from outside of the area. We even had 2 fly in, one from Chicago and one from Atlanta, to join us for the race. We anticipate the race continuing to grow. I decided that I was going to run because I was disappointed in the last election 2 years ago when there wasn't a Republican name on the ballot. And I couldn't expect other people to step up to run if I wasn't willing to do so myself. Therefore, I threw my name into the hat. I would like to focus on a couple of things, if elected, specifically some changes to the criminal justice system in the frame of corrections and rights for juveniles. Some of you may recall I did a presentation on the Making a Murderer docuseries a number of years ago. Both of those individuals are still in prison. One of them really doesn't belong there. So I hope to address some of the criminal justice issues. Thank you.
JoAnn Dayton, you now have 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening. First, I want to thank Lindsay Travis and the staff here at the library for hosting us tonight, our panel, and each of you for coming out to learn more about your candidates. Serving as your representative for Wyoming House District 17 has been a very humbling experience and an honor to represent the citizens of Rock Springs, Superior, Point of Rocks, Reliance, and other parts of Sweetwater County. My name is JoAnn Dayton. I'm retired from Jenner, Wyoming, formerly OCI. I'm a widow with 2 adult children and 3 beautiful, talented granddaughters. During recent years, Wyoming's boom and bust cycle has affected the work done by the entire legislature. I remain dedicated to ensuring we maintain the quality of services Wyoming citizens enjoy. Serving on the Labor, Health, and Social Services Committee along with Revenue since 2015 has provided me the opportunity to work for economic diversity, quality education, support for our seniors, public lands, and our working families. Keeping in contact with you, my constituents, is important. While I've knocked on doors, I've enjoyed visiting with the residents of House District 17 about their thoughts and concerns, and we even go into family updates occasionally. You are important to me, and I'm here to serve you. I will continue working to build a better, stronger Wyoming. This is the heart of what I do and my commitment to each of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to the question portion of the forum. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question. Representative Dayton, you will answer this first question first. As a legislator from Sweetwater County, what would be your priority in that representation?
Thank you, Tom. The first priority is to represent everyone equally. We have businesses, specifically the mineral business, that supports about 68% of our revenues. And that's gone down over the years to about 58% was the last figure I had. So we need to be fair in our assessment of those. We talk about, changing Wyoming's tax structure, and it probably needs to be done. But I don't think so at the expense of losing some of our mineral industry. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, are you? Same question? Or
Yeah,
different
same
Okay.
question.
I didn't know if you were going to be in between. So one of the priorities that I would have for this area, I live in the floodplain around here. My insurance when I first got here for flood insurance was $800 a year. Over the next 6 years, it ballooned to $2,400 a year. We need to rectify that. There has been some changes in that. Additional insurance companies have come in and had offered additional plans. So I am back down to about $700 a year. But I have not had a flood at that residence since the 80s. That's something that really really need to finish that project, and we need to invite the federal government to come back in and reevaluate whether that is a floodplain. People don't buy houses down there specifically because they are required to have flood insurance in that area. One of my other priorities was to make sure that we maintain our businesses that are here. We have to have the college here. We need that economic base, though, through all of the businesses and our mineral businesses, Halliburton, et cetera. We need all those in order to maintain our population and our economic base around here. So it's very important to keep them and keep them on a firm ground. Thanks.
Next question. Do you support tax cuts for the oil and gas industries in Wyoming? Please explain why or why not. Ms. Ciepiela, you may answer first.
This past legislative session over the last couple of years, I recall there being a discussion in Cheyenne over whether or not Wyoming needs to introduce an income tax at some point in the future. That's the wrong move to make. That is definitely the wrong move to make. I've been in other states that have taxed the state into almost oblivion. The state of New York, where I grew up, they promised that those toll booths would be removed as soon as the interstate was paid for. And they are still there. The interstate was paid for decades ago. The state of Missouri actually actively lied to their constituents, promising all kinds of road construction as long as they increased taxes on themselves. They did. Those roads are still not built. And again, it is decades later. The state of Michigan is in just poor condition to begin with. So the state of Wyoming definitely needs to look at revenue. However, I don't see an income tax for individuals as being the right way to go. Should we have tax cuts for the oil and gas industry? We may need to look at that in order to keep them on a firm setting, on a firm ground. Thanks.
Ms. Dayton?
It's a framework that we need to look at, but I'm not in favor of raising taxes for oil and gas industry. We need to keep our energy companies whole and collect from companies not paying anything to Wyoming. There are many companies out there that don't pay anything. We call it throwback income that other states are collecting, that Wyoming should be collecting too. An example is our ad valorem tax. Currently, your counties collect that, but it's approximately 18 months behind from when the ores minerals were collected. And in doing so, during that 18 months, we've seen a lot of oil and gas companies exchange ownership. They leave the state, and therefore your cities and counties don't get that money. So I would be in favor of looking at the way we collect our ad valorem tax and not increase the taxes, but just collect what's due to the state at this time. Thank you.
Representative Dayton, you may answer this question first. What is your position on the governor's Endow program?
Thank you, Tom. The Endow Committee has done a tremendous amount of work during the interim and have come up with some feasible projects that would help the city and counties and our state. They're addressing things like how to keep our young citizens here rather than losing them to our neighboring states where they make a better living. You know, I have 2 adult children that chose not to stay in Wyoming for that very reason. They got their education here, but moved on. So that's one of the areas that Endow's looking at. They're also looking at education. They're looking at diversity of our income. They're looking at things that the legislature really hasn't had the wholehearted time to do and take into consideration. Whoever our next governor is, I would like to see that person in their position continue with Endow. Thank you.
Candidate Ciepiela, your response.
Thank you. I attended the Endow meetings that took place here in Rock Springs over the summer, and I talked to them briefly myself about the plight of the triathlon that I helped to produce here in town. We discussed how difficult it was to get it approved, how difficult it was to run the race, and how difficult it was to get the state to get on board. We didn't expand the race last year because the state basically said bikes don't belong on certain roads. I think that has been rectified at this point, and you'll see an expansion of the race this year. But they're working on things like connectivity. We need to have internet statewide in every corner in order to make sure that we are viable for the future. We absolutely need to look at our lifestyle, because they talked about how many people are working in Cheyenne and living in Fort Collins. We need to address those things, and that's what Endow is looking at. I specifically was there for the tourism aspect of it. Again, we had such a difficult time trying to get the state on board with the race. And this would fit in perfectly with tourism. Like I said, we brought people from Chicago and Atlanta to do this race this past year. That's what the state really needs to go after more, instead of trying to throw up roadblocks and stopping it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support state legislation that would legalize the use of THC for medical purposes? Ms. Ciepiela, you're first.
Thank you. As a former police officer, I cannot condone the idea of legalization of THC. For medical purposes, that's where we need to have a discussion. There are forms of marijuana that are non-intoxicating. I'm all for that, especially for kids that have seizures. For individuals who are sick and terminal, I'm open to the idea. When we talk about medical marijuana, we talk about if people fall down and get a bruise, they can go to the doctor and get marijuana for that bruise because it's so painful. I would not be for that. I would be against the idea of that. I am for the idea that we need to have a conversation what we are going to do, but we need to make sure that we are prepared for what happens. Colorado has had a 10-year plus experiment now going on with these plants and these massive grows. There's toxic fumes that are created by the chemicals that are used. The firefighters are unprepared. They don't have enough people to inspect these facilities to make sure that they're safe. We have houses blowing up because people make mistakes in the method that they're using to create dabs. But I don't think we're prepared. I don't think we're ready yet. But we need to have a conversation. I have no problem with people that are terminal using it or children with the oil. And I see your sign. I'll stop in a second. But we need to have an actual conversation as to whether we're ready.
Thank you. Representative Dayton?
Thank you, Dave. The Judicial Committee of the Legislature has been tossing this around for about 3 or 4 sessions now. And we always end up with, well, we've talked about it, let's go on. If we were to pass laws for medical marijuana and they were distributed by licensed physicians with controls on it, I would really consider it. We have a lot of people out there that it would benefit, because we're kidding ourselves if we don't think they're not already going over the state line and getting it and self-prescribing. I would be in favor of them having a physician available to them and helping with the amount that they use and how they use it. Also, I agree with Traci. Wyoming's not ready for it yet. Colorado wasn't ready when they introduced it. We need to be more prepared. I would say let's take a look at the state of Washington and how they implemented it. So it is a discussion that's been ongoing, and I don't see an immediate answer in our future for it, but I'd be willing to continue those discussions. Thank you.
Our next question will be for Representative Dayton. Recently, a judge overturned the efforts of the Wyoming Game and Fish to delist grizzly bears. Do you think this is a good decision? Why or why not?
Well, there are a lot of guns in my house, but I'm not a hunter. And I've heard a lot of pros and cons on this, mostly cons, thinking that the judge's decision was incorrect, that we've had several grizzly attacks lately, and therefore we need to have the hunt. The hunt would bring dollars needed to Wyoming and tourism, and Game and Fish would also benefit from it. So I think the judge was wrong on his choice here. Thank you.
Well, Candidate Ciepiela, your response.
I would tend to agree. I know we've heard a lot about recent attacks from grizzlies. I'd like to see if they're actually on the increase before we jump off that ledge. Because it could just be that the increase of social media availability makes us think that certain things could be happening when they might not be. But I think, having judges outside of this state make those decisions, probably not the best decision possible. I'm also not a hunter, but I do see why individuals would like to engage in that activity. There are people that already purchased permits, so how are we going to deal with that now as well? But I think it's something we need to look at. At a certain point, animals do come back. and they're not as endangered as they used to be. So we need to really take a look at that and make sure that we are doing the right thing before we have more people get attacked and hurt or killed. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you support carbon capture as a means of prolonging the lives of our coal-fired power plants? Why or why not? Ms. Ciepiela, you're first.
No.
Why not?
I would say I understand that a lot, coming from the East Coast originally, I understand a little bit of the panic about carbon footprint and global warming because they don't have dirt anywhere. They have concrete lives. And that stretches pretty much all the way to the Mississippi, and then you get past the Mississippi and things are a little different. So where the East Coast calls for things like this and Washington calls for, oh, we got to do carbon taxing and we've got to cap taxes and we've got to cap carbon, and I would be for planting trees over capping carbon at this point. Trees do wonderful things, and I think we need a few up north with the fire. I think we need to replant some, but I don't see that as a good idea. No, thank you.
Representative Dayton, your answer.
Thank you, Dave. I agree with Traci. We probably need to do some replanting after the fires, but I'm in favor of carbon capture. We've suffered a lot in Wyoming and lost a lot of revenue with the reduced coal sales. In fact, you heard me say earlier we had about a 70% revenue from our minerals industry, and it's down. And if we don't do something to keep coal in Wyoming and be a viable revenue source, we'll be down to 52%. And Wyoming cannot sustain on that. So it's going to take both. It's going to take the carbon capture, it's going to take planting trees and other things to keep us going as a state. Thank you.
This next question would be for Representative Dayton first. Would you favor changing the formula for sales tax distribution to the cities?
That's very interesting. That was one of the things just asked last month up in Buffalo when we had the Revenue Committee meeting, and we're discussing it and taking it under consideration. If we had a 1% increase in sales tax, that could produce approximately $172 million to the state of Wyoming. If we increased sales tax by 0.5%, and giving that authority to cities and counties to pass that legislation, we could get them off of the general fund, which would free up state dollars for other things. Your counties don't have that option. By statute, they cannot increase the taxes. So getting back to your question, I believe I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
Just a quick clarification. We're talking about the formula for which sales tax is distributed to the cities.
Sorry, I misunderstood you, Tom. Sorry about that. The formula's been around for a long time, and right now, $105 million is given back to cities, counties, and towns biannually. I don't see a need at this time to change the formula if we're going to continue giving it out of the general fund. Thank you.
Candidate Ciepiela, your response.
Thank you. I will briefly comment on what was the discussion that started. I've been in cities where sales taxes have been increased. Oh, it's just a penny. It's just a penny. It's just a penny. And, oh, it's just temporary. It'll come off later on. And 30 years later, it's still there. and they still vote on it every single year. And then they say, well, you're not going to have these services or those services unless you vote for it. So immediately increasing sales taxes is a dangerous route to take without careful looking at what we're doing. But as for the formula, at this point, I would agree. I don't see a need to change it. We can look, but at this point, it is what it is.
Thank you. Those are our questions. We do have a question from the audience, and I think our rotation will go back to Representative Dayton for this. What is the solution to the state's problems for education funding?
That's a very interesting question. It's one that your legislature has fought with for the last 4 or 5 years. We have to do something to get the school foundation monies back in. We can't continue to take them out of our rainy day funds, or better known as the LSRA. Eventually, there's not going to be any money there again. The solution for it would be for more revenue coming into the state. And how are you going to do that if you don't learn to diversify your economy? And I agree with Traci. Sometimes when we put a tax on, it stays on. But this would be a tax that would go before your voters. Right now, we have the 5th penny. Do we want to continue the 5th penny in Sweetwater County? That should be up to the voters to decide. Thank you.
Senator Ciepiela, your response.
I am personally impacted every single year by the state's education funding. What I do know is certain things do tend to take place. For example, and I'm going to make one example out of UW. This past year, they hired a diversity officer. It's a new administrative position to the tune of $150,000 plus benefits. I don't see the need to keep adding and increasing administrative positions, especially like this one. I'm not really sure what they do in their position on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure we need a diversity officer. I've heard from students at UW that they have opened this brand new awesome building and the students don't even have access to it unless you're an athlete. I don't see that as appropriate. I think we need to be more careful on what we're doing with our education dollars, and we need to look at what kind of positions are we increasing while getting rid of faculty or paraprofessional positions or professional positions. I think we need to look a little more closely at what we're doing. I don't see a need for a diversity officer at UW. I simply don't. That could have produced 2 faculty members at another college. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. At this time, we're going to move on to closing statements. Ms. Ciepiela, you have 3 minutes. Not according to my script.
Okay, that's fine. I started the introduction, but that's fine. Again, my name is Traci. This is the first campaign I've ever run. I've lived here in Wyoming for 13 years. I've been personally impacted by the way the state runs, especially with their education formula. I've been personally impacted by that. Yes, the Board of Trustees at our college graciously awarded us a 3% raise this past year. Honestly, that was probably the biggest raise that I've received in over 8. So we need to, if we want to keep people here, we need to bring incentives in for people to stay here. If there's nothing for people to do, people are going to go away. If there aren't jobs, people are going to get their education here in Wyoming, where it's nice and rather inexpensive for them compared to some of the other schools out there, and they're going to move on. They're going to live in Fort Collins and come into the state just to work, taking the tax dollars back to Colorado. We need to make sure that Wyoming is a place that people want to be in the future. I think Endow is a great idea. I think we need that connectivity. I think we need the tourism. I think we need the lifestyle to be addressed. And I'd like to see Wyoming lead in the future with our technology. Interconnectivity is very important. There's so many meetings that go on all over the state and people drive for hours to get there. Not quite sure why we're not just connecting via the internet and saving a little money in that route. But I'm running for the office. Again, I can't expect other people to step up unless I'm willing to do so myself. So I'd appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Representative Dayton, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
I want to thank my opponent and all the candidates at every level for seeking public office. It isn't easy. It requires commitment and dedication. You've heard from both my opponent and myself this evening. Now the really tough and extremely important decision for you is to decide who is the best qualified candidate. To be effective, Wyoming Citizens Legislature requires time, knowledge, and working relationships. These are not gained overnight. I've given the time and developed the working relationships to be an effective voice for you in Cheyenne. I'm asking for your vote. I believe I have the dedication, experience, and desire to work for you. Together we will build a better, stronger Wyoming for you, your families, community, and state, for our future. In closing, I want to thank Lindsay again and her staff, the panel, and you for coming out tonight. Also, the large number of constituents who have already or will be casting their absentee ballots, and those who will be joining me in the polls on November 6th. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you to the candidates for participating in this forum and to everyone who has joined us this evening. We'll be taking a short break and come back for the Wyoming Senate District 13 forum, which is scheduled for 7 p.m. tonight.